In recent years, international economic issues have taken center stage. Nations have become more interdependent than ever, though the growth in international trade and investment has been there for a long time, but in recent years the interdependence has increased a lot. With the exponential growth of international trade and the intertwining of the countries across the globe, there have been episodes of trade conflict, and these have become more and more evident and also interesting from the point of view of analysis. One such conflict is to worry and understand about gains from trade. One popular perception is that if one country gains through trade, then the other country would be losing. But contrary to the popular belief, there can be a wide range of circumstances in which all countries can mutually gain from trade, and there could be circumstances in which international trade is a positive sum game, not a zero sum game. But even if international trade ensures some positive gains for both the countries involved in trade, it may not ensure Pareto superior situation for all concerned. In other words, the gains from trade can be unevenly distributed. So, judging international trade can be, the gains from international trade can be very subjective depending on which perspective we are talking about. Are we talking about the gains for individual nations, or are we talking about gains in general for the community of nations? Academic discussion therefore has to be undertaken in depth before we jump to any conclusion on this issue. There are four basic international basic questions in international trade. One is the importance of international trade. Secondly, why do nations import and export certain products? What is the basis of trade? Then we have, what are the terms of trade? At what terms of trade products exchange in the international arena, in the community of nations? And then finally we have the question of what are the gains from trade in terms of both production as well as consumption. We are now in a position to discuss the last issue, which is gains from trade. So in this module we will be examining the question of gains from trade. From the very inception trade theory, the idea was based on the possible existence of gains from trade. During the period of 1500 to 1880, according to the mercantilists, if a country could achieve a favorable trade balance, it would realize a net payment receivable from the rest of the world, and this would be in the form of gold and silver, and this would contribute to the nation building process. But the mercantilists were of the view that international trade is based on the idea of fixed wealth of nations, that is, that one nation's gain from trade came at the expense of its trading partner. Not all nations could simultaneously enjoy the benefits of trade. This view was first challenged by the classical economist Adam Smith, and later other proponents also challenged this view. There were some modern trade theorists who suggested that both the trading partners could simultaneously enjoy a higher level of production and consumption along with trade. Ricardo's theorem or theory of comparative advantage suggested that specialization in trade could lead to gains from trade for both the nations involved in trade. Like Adam Smith, Ricardo also emphasized the supply side of the market. Unlike Adam Smith, however, Ricardo emphasized the comparative cost differences, and Ricardo asserted that both nations could gain from trade.
After studying this module, you shall be able to identify sources behind gains from trade, understand the gains from trade under different opportunity cost of production conditions, deconstruct gains from trade into consumption gains and production gains, differentiate static gains from trade and dynamic gains from trade, and evaluate whether trade actually can make everybody better off. The following are the sources of gains from trade. 1. Differences in cost ratios. 2. Reciprocal demand. 3. Terms of trade. 4. Productive efficiency. 5. Nature of commodities exported. And 6. Size of the country. Let us now learn these factors in detail. Moving on to the first factor, differences in cost ratios. The gains from international trade depend on differences in comparative cost ratios in the two trading nations. A country gains by foreign trade if and when the traders find that there exists abroad a ratio of prices very different from home. Any acceptable international terms of trade has to be more favorable than or equal to the rate defined by the domestic price line. The region of mutually beneficial trade is thus bounded by the cost ratios of the two nations. The greater the differences in comparative cost ratios, the larger are the gains from trade. The second source of gains from trade is reciprocal demand. The actual terms of trade are determined by the relative strength of each country's demand for the other country's product. A country gains the most from trade whose demand for foreign goods is highly elastic, while the other country's demand for its goods is highly inelastic. The third and the most important factor which determines the gains from trade is the terms of trade. The commodity terms of trade is a frequently used measure of the international exchange ratio. It measures the relationship between the prices that a nation gets for its export and the prices it pays for its imports. This refers to the barter terms of trade which Mill used to determine the gains as well as the distribution of the gains from international trade. The next factor is productive efficiency. An increase in the productive efficiency of a country also determines its gains from trade, as it lowers costs of production and prices of goods that a country exports. The next source of gains from trade is the nature of commodities exported. A country which exports mainly primary products has unfavorable terms of trade. Consequently, its gains will be smaller. On the contrary, a country exporting manufactured goods has favorable terms of trade, and its gain from trade will be larger. Gains from trade also depend on the size of the country. If two nations are of unequal economic size, it is possible that the relative demand strength of the smaller nation will be dwarfed by that of the larger nation. Assuming the absence of monopoly elements working in the markets, the small nation can export as much of the commodity as it desires enjoying large gains from trade. If one nation is significantly larger than another, the larger nation attains fewer gains from trade, while the smaller nation attains most of the gains from trade. This situation is characterized as the importance of being unimportant. Gains from trade can be measured by 1. Constant opportunity cost, complete specialization and gains from trade, and 2. Incomplete specialization and gains from trade. Constant opportunity cost, complete specialization and gains from trade. Let us assume there are two countries, home and foreign, and the goods under consideration are X and Y. Labor is the only factor of production, and we are talking about constant opportunity cost of production technology. ALX and ALY are unit labor requirement of the goods X and Y respectively. We assume that at home the opportunity cost of producing X is lower than in foreign. If Px and Py are the international prices of these two goods respectively, then we have seen that in international equilibrium, if neither country produces both goods, we must have Px by Py greater than ALX by ALY. In case of direct production, home could produce Y directly or produce X directly and trade it for Y and get it indirectly. If it produces Y directly by using 1 unit of labor, then it can produce 1 by ALY units of Y. If it uses the 1 unit of labor to produce X instead, then it will produce 1 by ALX units of X. This X could then be traded for Y, with each unit trading for Px by Py units of Y. So, through this trade route, Home's 1 unit of labor yields 1 by ALX into Px by Py units of Y. Now, the condition for both countries will completely specialize as follows. Px by Py greater than ALX by ALY, or in other words, 1 by ALX into Px by Py is greater than 1 by ALY, which simply means that home can produce Y more efficiently by making X and trading it than by producing Y directly for itself. The opposite is true for the foreign country. This is one way of seeing that both the countries gain. Another way to see the mutual gains from trade is to examine how trade affects each country's possibilities for consumption. In figure, solid lines PF and P star F star are the production possibility frontier of home and foreign respectively. These PPFs are negatively sloped straight lines as we assume fixed factor endowment and constant opportunity cost. In the absence of trade, consumption possibilities are the same as production possibilities. The actual production point and consumption point coincide and can be anywhere along the PPFs. However, with trade, both countries' consumers' possibility has widened and can consume a different mix of X and Y from the mix that it produces. The consumption possibilities of home are indicated by the line TF, and that of foreign is indicated by T star F star. In each case, trade has enlarged the range of choices and therefore definitely make the residents of each country better off. Under constant costs, Both nations specialize completely in the production of the commodity of their comparative advantage. By contrast, under increasing opportunity costs, there is incomplete specialization in production in both the nations. The reason is that as each nation specializes in producing the commodity of its comparative advantage, its opportunity cost of production increases with increased level of production, and hence relative commodity prices move towards each other until they are identical in both nations. In a more realistic and standard trade model, factors of production are substitutable and opportunity cost increases with output. In the figure, the PPF of a country is shown by the concave line PP, where producers optimize by equating the marginal rate of transformation, which is the slope of the PPF, to whatever prices prevail. Similarly, consumers optimize by equating their marginal rate of substitution, which is the slope of the community indifference curve, to the price ratio, which is P star equals to Px star divided by Py star. With the world price ratio P star, the international trade opens up the opportunity to shift the consumption point to C, the production point shifted to Q, with the level of welfare CICF, which is higher than the autarky level of welfare. Here, the country is exporting X and importing Y. MCQ is the trade triangle. The improvement of the community indifference curve is the welfare gains from trade. The gains from trade can be conveniently broken down into gains from two distinctive sources: gains from exchange and gains from specialization, as shown in the figure. Nation 1 is a very small country which does not affect the price of its trading partner or the rest of the world. Traditional models of international trade, such as those based on Ricardo and Heckscher Orlin, focus on the gains in economic efficiency that result from specialization and reallocation of existing resources. These gains are often referred to as the static gains from trade. However, these gains can often be dwarfed by the effect of trade on the country's growth rate and thus on the additional resources made available and utilized by the trading country. These are known as dynamic gains from international trade. They are dynamic in the sense that they change the evolution of an economy through time, that is, altering the growth path. There are a number of avenues through which such dynamic gains can be realized, including increased investment rate, technology transfers and spillover from foreign direct investments, improvements in macroeconomic policies, offshoring, and internationalization of the supply chain. International trade tends to bring a higher level of income through more efficient allocation of productive resources. This increased level of income eventually gives rise to a higher level of saving and hence investment. In a roundabout manner or multiplier effect, higher levels of investment eventually result in higher levels of economic growth. A major indirect dynamic gain from trade is that on the one hand, it widens the size of the market, and on the other hand, international trade induces economies of large scale production, allowing small and moderately sized countries to establish and operate many plants of efficient size. Both encourage inventions and innovations, raise labor productivity, lower costs, and lead to a fostering of growth. Increased foreign competition can also be a source of dynamic gains from trade. As international trade fosters dynamic gains for the country engaged in trade, trade liberalization enhances the realization of such kinds of gains. Domestic firms' development of new products using foreign intermediate inputs or machinery is an important way in which trade liberalization can generate dynamic gains. Consequently, economies with barriers to the introduction of new products may have lower innovation rates and experience smaller dynamic gains from a given level of liberalization. The ability of domestic firms to take advantage of new technology can also be crucial to the realization of dynamic gains from trade liberalization. In the Ricardian model, everyone gains, but in the factor proportions model, there are typically losers as well as winners from trade. As trade opens up, it raises the price of the good export where the country has comparative advantage, hence the return of the factor which has been used intensively to produce the exportable, and lowers the price of the good where it has comparative disadvantage, hence the return of the factor intensively used to the importable item is lowered too. Since we no longer can assert that trade benefits everyone, we need to take a reality check of the gains from trade. Let us assume there are two groups of people, M and N. M group prefers more of Y goods and N group prefers more of X goods. Also assume that post-trade relative price line is steeper than the autarky level so that the country would be exporting X and importing Y. In the absence of trade, group M and N would be consuming at points M and N respectively, facing the autarky price line AA with the welfare level UM and UN. After trade, the country is facing the steeper price line TT. Now, clearly, Group M's welfare has gone up to UM dash, but Group N's welfare has gone down to UN dash. So, trade made Group M better off and Group N worse off. Often, proponents of free trade or free trade lovers are theoretically able to compensate trade haters for harm done because of trade making everyone better off. If this is possible, then trade is potentially a source of gain for everyone. This is illustrated in the figure. Before trade, the economy's production and consumption point were at A on its production possibility frontier. The budget constraint in the figure represented by the world price line PW represents all possible combinations of both X and Y that the country could consume given the world relative price of X. Part of this budget constraint falls in the shaded region, which simply means it is possible to consume more of both goods in the post-trade situation compared to autarky. If the economy as a whole consumes more of both goods, then it is possible in principle to give each individual more of both goods. This would make everybody better off. The fundamental reason why trade potentially benefits a country is that it expands the economy's choices. This expansion of choice means that it is always possible to redistribute income in such a way that everyone gains from trade. In reality, an economy consists of heterogeneous groups of people. So, the government must weigh one group's gain against another group's loss. There are many reasons, like political pressure groups, well organized groups, already very poor groups, or backward groups, why a particular group gets special attention and treatment more than others.
This module extends the simple understanding that countries gain from trade if they can trade at any price different from the domestic or the autarkic price. Any price difference allows a country to gain by selling what is relatively more valuable on the world markets and buying what is relatively more expensive for producing at the uh, home market. That is, if it does not possess a comparative advantage, then it should rather import that commodity and export the commodity in which it has a comparative advantage. In this way, uh, all the nations trading with each other would gain. From the mercantilist to the classical economists to the neoclassical economists, the proponents of modern trade theory seem to assert that there is an invariable gain from trade. Invariably, there would be a gain from trade. Gains from trade arise from price differences and the factors behind these price differences. The total gains from trade can be decomposed into two parts, gains due to exchange and gains due to specialization. Gains from exchange arise due to the expansion of the consumption possibility set. Gains from specialization arise due to the shift in the production process towards the good in which the country has a comparative advantage. Traditional trade models generally depict limit or limited to show or are limited to show the static nature of the gains from trade. However, gains from trade can be more dynamic in nature and they could also have a spillover effect. Even if it can be shown that trade is potentially mutually beneficial for both trading partners, but in reality the gains from trade could be unevenly distributed amongst them, and this may hurt certain groups of people apart from being unequal as between nations. However, with proper compensatory policies, this inequality or unevenness could be corrected.